Homage to the Triple Gem. This is Bhante Joe here, and I'm just here at Nikapitiya Aranya in Welawaya, and was asked a question maybe a couple months ago now about the Paramis, which was basically how does one practice the Paramis. So I've written them down. I don't have the list memorized, so just recite them here. Dana, Sila, Nekama, Panya, Virya, Kanti, Satya, Adhitthana, Mettā, and Upekkha. So these are 10 paramis that occur in the Jataka stories, and they also occur in a text called the Charya Pitaka, which I think is about the deeds that the Buddha did to become a Buddha. So these 10 qualities, these 10 paramis, they're traditionally associated with the quest that a bodhisattva, or somebody who wants to become a Buddha in the future, has to undergo in order to actually become a Buddha. So the things that Buddhas actually have to go through are very extreme, really intense. They have to experience every type of suffering, every type of happiness that there is. And it's just, it's an immensely, it'd be hard to overstate the difficulty of that path. It's the most, most difficult path that one can walk, basically. So for a Buddha, they have to develop these qualities in a full and complete way, basically, beyond a certain point, in order to fulfill their vow to become a Buddha. It's actually interesting that, in this kind of later Buddhist material that's in like the Charya Pitaka and I think they've got the Buddha Vangsa, and there's these different books in the Khuddaka Nikaya that are humongous, the Jatakas. The Khuddaka Nikaya it means like Khuddha, it means like minor. It's not big. It's now the biggest Nikaya. In any event, because of that, I personally had a lot of suspicion, and people have a lot of suspicion anyways, about the truths of these texts. But apparently that's actually the way that Buddhas actually develop their paramis is reflected to a certain extent in these texts. To become a Buddha or whatever it might be, one has to make a vow, and having made that vow, then one's mind inclines towards certain births, inclines towards certain things, and one has to overcome tests to one's vow in order to develop the qualities that one needs to fulfill it. And then the way that Kamma works as well is that there's a certain tipping point with these vows beyond which one can't turn back from them. It's impossible to put the vow down. One has to achieve it. It's just a matter of how fully one achieves it. So this list of paramis is something we don't know. It's in these books. Is this actually the list that one has to develop to become a Samma Sambuddha or not? We don't know for sure. But it is a kind of good list of good qualities. So if one wants to become a bodhisattva and become a Buddha, then one will have to really develop these completely. Almost imagine it like somebody who wants to find a route to, say, a landmark in the center of a city. Each city has these kind of big landmarks. In Toronto, it's a CN Tower. New York has, Wall Street, Central Park. If you want to find your way to one of these monuments or one of these landmarks in one of these big cities, then basically all you have to know is the route that you have to go. You have to be familiar enough with the roads that you have to travel and some of the dangers you might encounter along the way so that you can make your way from wherever you are at that moment to the place where you're trying to go safely and, with ideally as quickly as possible. For a Buddha, it's different. They are developing the paramis necessary, these qualities of mind necessary that they can lead people onwards from wherever they are, not just within that city sometimes, within the world. So imagine, rather than just having to know the particular street you're going down and where to turn it, you don't even have to know the side streets. You just have to know how to get there from where you are. Imagine somebody who has to go and walk down every single street, every single side street, all over the place in the world, and become proficient in how to get to this location from each of those places. So that if they meet somebody in the future, their vow gets fulfilled, who's in one of those places, they can give very specific directions. And they also understand the principles that underlie the journey from wherever it is in the world that one needs to travel to get to this location. Let's say at the CN Tower, because I'm from the Toronto area. So, for people who do not want to become Buddhas, who just want to become Arahants under our Buddha, the Buddha Gautama, then their path is different. All we need to know is the streets, the paths that we need to go down. So what this means is that in terms of developing these paramis, it's not like we have to look at the whole list of paramis and be like, okay, I've got to fully develop satya and fully develop adhitthana, fully develop all of these. What we're trying to do is develop the qualities that we need to overcome the defilements that we have. And also the canon describes the development of qualities in that you base yourself on your strengths to develop your weaknesses. So this is where the path to the development of these wholesome qualities becomes something very individual, because each person has a unique set of strengths, a unique set of weaknesses. And you can kind of map them onto that list somehow. Am I more strong in sila than in dana, or whatever it might be. There's a certain baseline that everybody has to develop that's, should ideally develop, that's elaborated in the suttas. You should be keeping sila, the five precepts. And if you're a monk, you should keep the patimokkha. All the things that are laid out in the suttas are where the Buddha lays baseline categorical advice for all of his disciples, or for just monastics or just lay. That's what we need to develop regardless of who we are. So this is where it can be a bit like knowing the principles behind navigating the city and knowing the dangers that might be there. Knowing, okay, there's muggers in this corner, muggers in that corner, and there's shops where we can stop to refuel here and get food, and there's a restaurant where we can stop, and here's how you can order a taxi. These are the basic principles in navigating the Buddha's path that the Buddha lays out in the Pali Canon. And we might not encounter all of them. We might not need to know all of them. Hopefully we don't encounter a mugger. We might not take a taxi. We might take a streetcar instead. But the principles are there in the canon, so that wherever it is one's journeying on the globe, one can use these principles to get to the destination. But for each of us, in terms of which ones do we develop, generally it depends on which defilements are staring us in the face. As the path of practice for people not wanting to become Buddhas generally involves trying to learn through first-hand experience, using the principles that are in the suttas, in the Vinaya, in the Buddha's teachings, using those principles to overcome the defilements that plague one specifically. And each person is a little bit different in the defilements that they have and in the suffering that they have, and that means the approaches that they take will be different, will be based on their strengths. So you can tell which paramis you need to develop by figuring out what works in overcoming your defilements, overcoming one's defilements. And one will see, I'm stingy, I've got to conquer this with a gift, or what particular type of suffering is arising here, how do I overcome it? And it's often a combination of factors. Sometimes I remember, as a young monk, sometimes there'll be times when, I remember especially I was not like a very, not like a faith type. And in the monastic tradition, you're supposed to have a lot of like faith and respect and like love and care for your teachers. And, it's an excellent quality, but just my character was like a bit more of a skeptical type, not really faithy. So there'd be times in my monastic training when, be like all the monks got to, try to run and like compete to, wash the senior monk's feet or do whatever it might be for the senior monk. And, certain times I'd be like, I'm not going to run for that. He's already gone. And I would have suffering because of this, kind of not wanting to do these kind of things, not wanting to, become this person who is full of faith but not much wisdom. To overcome that kind of suffering, I actually mean these things are very wholesome to develop. It required elements of relinquishment, required elements of dana. You relinquish your opinions and just help the senior monk. In dana, you learn to give to the senior monk. It requires a number of things. It requires virya to try to force yourself to do the things that you don't like. But depending on the situation at hand, those are the qualities that come to play in overcoming that specific type of suffering. So you don't necessarily have to think of it in terms of this list, like I've got this type of suffering, what's the list of paramis? It may be a helpful list for a person to use, but sometimes it's after we overcome the suffering, after we've engaged in hand-to-hand combat with whatever defilement we might have, that we recognize what were the qualities that we developed in that situation. You can kind of plan it out a little bit, but it's not always necessary. This is like walking down the road and just learning to overcome the obstacles that we have. Learning to walk down the road, and maybe sometimes you take a little bit long term, you reconsult the map and keep going. Sometimes you encounter somebody who tries to stop you on your path, who gives you wrong directions. Okay, consult the map and keep going, go in the wrong direction. So our individual development of paramis proceeds this way, looking at what defilements are staring us in the face and using the qualities that we have in our own minds to overcome them. Now, what this means is that usually the qualities that we're going to use are going to be based on our strengths. That's really important. So we don't necessarily have to look at the list and be like, okay, my aditana is weak, my aditana parami is weak, or I don't know, my mettā parami is weak, so I'm exclusively going to focus on mettā. Right? What we look at is what the defilements that are plaguing us right now are, and then we learn to apply our strengths, base our development of the qualities that we're weak in on our strengths. So I remember when I was a young man, I was in business school, and I felt good about marketing and the creative side of business and kind of coming up with ideas and advertising or that side. But I was weak on the math side. I've never been a really good math person. So what did I do? I decided to take finance as my minor to kind of boost up my my weakness. What ended up happening when I was getting towards the end of university was all the jobs that I was people were kind of seeming interested to offer me were in finance. So you can end up going that way and developing a whole life based on your weaknesses, which is not a good approach if we're not trying to become a bodhisattva who has to develop all of these things fully. It's also not an efficient approach, because what it essentially, sometimes using that city analogy, it's like walking all the way over to another part of the city, and from that part of the city trying to go to, say, Central Park or go to the CN Tower. I mean, you're already here. You can just start from where you are and go directly to the CN Tower. So it's very important. So for example, if one has a very strong aditana parami, very strong energy, then one can use that quality to develop, say, mettā. Sometimes that kind of energy is associated with hatred, but you can flip that, use that strength to put forth effort to develop mettā. And sometimes people have very strong relinquishment parami, renunciation parami, and that sometimes couples up with these qualities like mettā and upekkha. These are other paramis. Yeah, it's okay, I can just let it go. But they won't have very strong, say, virya parami, or this kind of willingness to fight. So in that case, one can base one's motivation off of this mettā. I'm developing this quality of putting forth effort because it'll be a help for me, it'll be a help for other people in the future. And this is a way that I can become more diligent in uprooting my negative qualities, and this is an act of mettā. So whatever our strength is, we proceed through that to overcome our defilements. So the practice of these paramis is something very individual. It's not like we need to look at the list and try to develop every single one in the list. It's more like we look at our defilements, we try to overcome them, and oftentimes after that we'll see which ones we used. We might also know which ones were weak-ins, like having a plan of the city, knowing where there's dangers. We might know which paramis were weak-ins, so there could be dangers ahead. And you may want to try to develop those a little bit. But often the way that it actually happens, our practice unfolds, is we just start going, just start developing, and we see what's in front of us when we get there sometimes. It's not like you totally plan out your whole path, although sometimes you can plan a little bit. So that's the primary approach to developing the paramis, is to base oneself on one's strengths to overcome the defilements that are here now. And the paramis will develop automatically. If one has a bodhisattva vow, then one has to develop them fully. But if not, the path to arahantship is something much more individual. You can just see where we are right now, and we can look where we need to go and try to find the shortest, most direct route to get there. Okay, so that is the bit of an explanation on the paramis, and hope that everybody is keeping well and wishing everybody all the blessings of Dhamma practice.